We are up and running. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's a beautiful autumny morning here in the Midwest. We've got autumn colors that are just starting to peek out at us, and it's overcast, a little bit on the chill side. So we're ushering in that era of harvest time and Thanksgiving. So have you got your pumpkins on your stoop yet, Barrett?
Wow, Chris, you are really psychic because I do have pumpkins on my stoop. I don't always have them, but yeah, it was a good read. And I was just thinking about the overcast weather that my fiance Edith used to be a photographer, a professional photographer. She's still a photographer. But she would say this is the perfect weather for taking photos outside because it creates sort of a well-lit light box sort of lighting for any sort of pictures. So.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And as we see the fall colors come in more and more, um, the rainy days, like right after that kind of dreary morning rainstorm, and then the clouds don't really break up, but they get lighter, and so your light comes in. That's when you can get some of your best photographs because the glistening of the rain on the leaves enhances the color, and you end up with this amazing opportunity to photograph fall in its most glorious kind of format. So, and again, how complicated are things in this material world, but underneath it all, there is the pure joy of life itself. All of those colors, all of the manifestations of autumn are really love in manifestation in our visual experience of the surroundings that we're involved in here.
That's true, and in our neighborhood we have a lot of locust trees, which have the little leaves that turn kind of orange and fall off. And because of our interesting transition into fall, we had what felt like a really kind of early cold spell, and then all of a sudden we were back up into the 90s for a week and a half. So it's like half of those little leaves fell in that early fall weather we were starting to have. But then when it got hot, it's like, the trees sort of stopped. And now the other half are falling again. So it's very pretty around where I am.
Yeah, it is definitely setting itself up to be another really beautiful autumn ride. And then, of course, all the leaves go away and the skeletons come out.
Ooh.
Yes, there was an album of kind of jazzy rock music back in the 70s, if I remember right, called Bare Trees. And I always thought that particular track, Bare Trees, was one that really made us aware of the structure, the thing that is supportive of all of our beliefs. All of our beliefs are like leaves on the trees, but then when we remove our beliefs, we get down to that fundamental structure of life and what life really is. So a lot of things to be learned by observing the world around us.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting metaphor analogy we're using because you could say that the healing is then beginning to remove some of these branches bit by bit. And what happens if you keep going with that? Well, you're going to get down to the root, right? And that's what the Course really is always about. It's about getting to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem, same thing as always, the belief that we're separate from God, right? And that's the deepest issue. That's the core of it, every problem we've ever had. And if we can address that and actually undo that false belief, then all of the other problems in our life, they start melting away as well. So, there's a line, that forgiveness is or miracles are basically to help us solve problems. I think Bill Thetford really liked that line. So he would say, that this course is really a course in problem solving, which I thought was kind of interesting because the miracle solves our problems, not necessarily by fixing it out in the world, but by fixing our perception of it, we come into a state of peace. And we're actually kind of talking about that today. as we're continuing to go through the Song of Prayer pamphlet, and really talking about different kinds of healing in this section. So healing has, true healing is really a healing of the mind, but in the previous paragraphs right before we're picking up, he's talking about false healing, which is really a healing that we maybe believe that someone can heal us. That there's someone else out there who has something we don't. Now, again, that's really an idea of separation. And this paragraph really talks about that. So I'll just jump right in. It says, someone knows better. This, the magic phrase by which the body seems to be the aim of healing, as the world conceives of it. And to this wiser one another goes, to profit by his learning and his skill, to find in him the remedy for pain. How can that be? True healing cannot come from any quality assumed and then accepted as the truth, and used to help restore the wounded and to calm the mind that suffers from the agony of doubt. So, again, this might seem to be how things sort of play out on the level of form. We may go to another person who seems to kind of help us with something. But what he's saying is that true healing doesn't happen in an interaction between two bodies. A true healing happens on the level of mind, when the mind realizes that there is no hierarchy of illusion and that we are all one, as we always have been.
Yeah, it's interesting how in the journey to healing, we're always looking at things in our lives that we imagine to be wrong. And so, you've got a bad case of eczema, or you've got some kind of a problem with your bank account or your automobile, and that's the idea that you believe that you're trying to heal, and that's really, it's just a layer, because as you stated earlier, healing goes much, much deeper to the one core idea of disconnect from our source. But the Course lays out some very clear ideas and images about the idea of the unhealed healer. And I think that's something that in our current phase of awakening, I observe a lot. It's people claiming to be a healer, and then the next week asking for prayers and support because, their back is out, or they're limping from an old wound, or whatever. So we're surrounded by unhealed healers, and that's one of the things we have to begin to become very discerning about. Is, are you going to somebody and asking them to offer you or afford you something that they simply do not have in their possession? In order to be a healer, you have to have accepted the atonement and be able to extend that healing state of grace. So that's a recurrent theme that comes up over and over again in the Course in many different formats. But nonetheless, we do have to exercise a certain amount of appreciation for the fact that not everybody who claims to be a healer is really a healer. And we have to be actually willing to extend them forgiveness and help them on their road to accepting healing for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, we're all in this together, right? Even people who, start to take on this role, they may still have some work to do. And I always say that as we kind of go through our journey, when I started thinking about different healing classes to attend, or instructors, classes to take, or healing sessions to go to, I really kind of let my intuition be my guide, because not every one of the ones, even the ones that I ended up going to, not all of them, I would say, were that healed healer. It was clear on some of these occasions that I was working with someone who they had their own stuff, and most of us do, so that's okay. But I think to keep our eyes open to that, it'll help us avoid some of the pitfalls. And maybe help us avoid a twisted ankle or two on our journey, so that we don't need to step in that crack.
Exactly. I remember, this is just a little short diversion here, but I remember going to a practitioner healer in Milwaukee back in the 1970s, late 60s. And I can truthfully say that this was a person who had a profound and solid grasp of what the whole journey was all about. And when I went into her study in her home and sat down, I felt literally as though I had shifted out of my body. I was slightly dimensionally separate from my body, and the air or the environment around me was filled with these sparkling little points of light. And this woman, she had a huge reputation in the Christian Science community, and she did bring in a profound understanding of how to open herself up to the Christ. And so when you would sit with her, you definitely felt like doors were opening for you and that something profound was being experienced. So there are those out there who can give us a gigantic jump start in our own journey, and those are the ones that we pray for that connection. Reach out to the Holy Spirit and ask the Holy Spirit to have people of that nature cross your path, so that your journey here is not drawn out and extended beyond what needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, hey, we can all take all the help we can get. So I really like that way of looking at it.
Absolutely. Well, to go further with this theme here of separation versus union, is there a role for healing then that one can use to offer help for someone else? In arrogance, the answer must be no. Interesting. But in humility, there is indeed a place for helpers. It is like the role that helps in prayer and lets forgiveness be what it is meant to be. You do not make yourself the bearer of the special gift that brings the healing, but you recognize your oneness with the one who calls for help. For in this oneness is his separate sense dispelled, and it is this that made him sick. There is no point in giving remedy apart from where the source of sickness is, for never thus can it be truly healed. And that, is exactly what I was just talking about. There are those people that we encounter who can lift us up, and there are others we encounter that we can lift up. And the whole journey is not about fixing something. The whole journey is about that union. And that's what A Course in Miracles is really at the core all about. It's relationships. And it's not relationships that we have put a special binder on, that we have marked as being, this is my special relationship. But it's our relationship with everybody we encounter. And either we're willing to be lifted up, or we're willing to help lift those up around us, so that we begin to recognize that there is no separation.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of a story in Bill Thetford's biography, which is entitled Never Forget to Laugh, and written by Carol Howe. She's a really good friend of Bill's that shares a lot of stories, and it's a really well-researched book, actually. So, and also interesting and great read. So I encourage people to check that out. But in the book, one of his Bill's friends shares about a time that the two of them got together, for the afternoon or something at a coffee shop, I forget. But while they were sitting there, Bill was kind of talking about a lot of these spiritual concepts. And his friend's experience was that while Bill was talking, all of a sudden he shifted out of his body, and he was like looking at the whole experience from like beyond, or from a slight separation, or from this expanded place. And he started sharing what he was experiencing with Bill. And then when he was talking about where he was going in the sort of expanded sense, Bill also started to have this similar experience of expansion, and so they were sitting there both having this very expanded feeling while they're talking at a coffee shop or wherever they were. So I was like, that's pretty amazing. I think you're muted, Chris.
That's beautiful, and a very good example of how once we start to form that chain of interconnectedness, all of a sudden who we are becomes so much more enhanced. You take yourself, this single little point, and then you add another self and another self and another self, and all of a sudden you begin to realize, my God, look at how big we have become. And that's really the whole point of this journey that we're on, is to discover the connections that we have with each other and to appreciate the way that it leaves us at the end of the day, so that we are no longer diminished, but we are actually enhanced and expanded.
Yeah, I mean, you could look at like our small s self, the personality self, the individual self that we think we are, as sort of like I don't know, something that binds us or keeps us in this sort of contained place. It's even our mental concept of us is this body. We think that's what we are. And as we start to let go of that, as we start to open up to the idea that what we are is actually endless love, we really do let this go more and more often. We start to have these experiences of expansion, and we start wearing the smallness less and less often. We start to stay in the grandeur of our oneness with God, rather than going into the grandiosity or the littleness of the ego. And it really is a much better experience.
Yeah, and it gives us the opportunity to really arrive at a place where we're beginning to get a sense of what heaven on earth might actually look like.
Yeah, so leads us right into this next paragraph, where he says, "Healers there are, for they are sons of God who recognize their source and understand that all their source creates is one with them. This is the remedy that brings relief which cannot fail. It will remain to bless for all eternity. It heals no part, but wholly and forever. Now the cause of every malady has been revealed exactly as it is." Again, that is the separation from God. "And in that place is written now the holy word of God. Sickness and separation must be healed by love and union. Nothing else can heal as God established healing. Without him there is no healing, for there is no love." So a really beautiful message here, right? Sickness and separation must be healed by love and union. You could say that this is both a fact and also sort of a foreshadowing of how the sickness of the mind is undone. Even though in truth that sickness is already undone, right? The atonement is already complete. Within our awareness, it still seems to be unfolding. And so we allow that unfolding just to continue, and we do our best to sort of not get in the way of that healing that wants to occur. And our life starts to feel really joyful. We just reflect that love of God more and more in everything we do, and more of our relationships and activities. And again, there's a reason Jesus calls that state of being a happy dream, is because it's a very happy place, and that's where we're all going for.
Absolutely. And one of the things that comes up for me over and over again is how how amazing it is that we have this power, this literally omnipotent force that we have access to at all times. Because when you appreciate the beauty of the world around you, you start to see the love within it. And as you see the love, you literally start to make God manifest, because God is that love. And that, to me, I think is one of the most exciting concepts that I picked up in the course, is that I can go through my day's activities and I can selectively decide to either choose for manifesting my ego over here with, all its grumblings and mutterings and dark thoughts, or else I can literally bring God into this world by electing to embrace the Holy Spirit, my Christ consciousness. So that kind of empowerment is so beyond any of the gifts of the ego, becoming the president of the United States, becoming the head of the bank, becoming this, becoming that. Those are all such trivial pursuits when you stand them up against the idea of even the humblest of people, Mother Teresa in India, in the sweat holes of the world, bringing forth this manifestation of God, is so much more magnificent and so much more boundless and so much more desirable, really, as a theme for your life.
Yeah. When we really align with that spirit within ourselves, there is nothing that we cannot do, right? Because that spirit is omnipotent. So, but that's sort of the key, though, is to really let it be spirit-led, because the ego is sometimes happy to wear the spirit mask and say, "Oh, yes, now I'm a spiritual, guru or whatever," and take over. So there has to be a sort of just a little element of awareness of that possibility, because that will help deflate any of these sort of ego, mistaken paths that we can go on as our spiritual journey unfolds. So I think, as you were saying, Chris, that true connection with spirit is always one of humility, but it's not a false humility either. It's a genuine humility, as the Course says. We know that we are humble before God, yet great in Him, and I think that's sort of the fine line that we have to practice living in our lives.
That is very true. It is very much a part of our growing into our truth. And so picking up with this final paragraph that we'll look at today, it says, God's voice alone can tell you how to heal. Listen, and you will never fail to bring His kindly remedy to those He sends to you, to let Him heal them, and to bless all those who serve with Him in healing's name. The body's healing will occur because its cause has gone. And now, without a cause, it cannot come again in different form. Nor will death anymore be feared because it has been understood. There is no fear in one who has been truly healed, for love has entered now where idols used to stand, and fear has given way at last to God. And one of the things that we all have to deal with is that underlying fear of God that we all still are burdened with. And when we go into our meditative stance, getting down to that core level of trying to quiet the mind and to wait for that presence to reveal itself in our consciousness, there is that hesitance to cease to be who you are, to cease to be Joe or Barret or Chris or whatever, and to allow yourself to enter into that union with Jesus, wherein you become the Christ, wherein you are completely enveloped by God. So in our daily journeys, there are a lot of struggles that we do have. That is the fundamental struggle, though, is to get to that point where you can finally release being who you are. And in that state of surrender, recognize the truth of who you are. And then all of a sudden, you are becoming the light of the world as you were truly meant to be.
Yeah, beautiful. That's spot on, man. Yeah. Yeah, I really like that idea, and I fear is really the only thing. What was the line? We have nothing to fear but fear itself. It's such a good line, right? And what do we come to see as we do this work? That fear is nothing. So what are we fearing but nothing, right? It's hard sometimes to see that, and it takes a lot of practice and persistence to see that everything we've ever feared has actually been meaningless and has been nothing. But the gift of seeing that is such a reward, right? Because what is our life, from cradle to grave, except for some form of fear? And there's always something we're afraid of. We're afraid of not getting what we want. We're afraid of something bad happening. We're afraid of death itself. And what are we seeing here? This paragraph even says that ultimately we'll see that death is nothing to fear because there's nothing there. So this is a very grand vision that we're being given, and I think it's a beautiful one that I've heard people say before, that we don't want to shrink the Course down to our image of ourselves. We want to actually realize the grandeur of the Course itself, and strive to be that grandeur as well. And I think that kind of idea really helps us to live these concepts rather than just hear them and try to think about them. And this is a process of coming into this expanded state of being. And it is a process. So if we're not there yet, we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves, but just realize that this is what we're going for. This is our goal. Yeah.
Well, and we're kind of running short on time here, but it was definitely a wonderful experience spending this last half hour dialoguing about the song of prayer. And we will be continuing with the next step, which is the holiness of healing. And that in itself is a very beautiful vision that it is imparting to us.
Yeah, it's the last section of this pamphlet, and it's again, it's a very sweet and beautiful one. So definitely tune in the next few weeks so that you can get as much out of it as you can. Chris and I both have a few events coming up. On October 21st, I'm going to be in Iowa with my friends Josh and Mary Hahn for an event called A Course in Miracles Experience. And then a few weeks later, on Sunday, November 5th, Chris and I are joining with a few other Course teachers here in the Chicago area for an afternoon called Exploring the Course from 1 to 5 in the afternoon. And we'd love to have you at both or either of those events, and or however it works to connect with us. Absolutely.
And definitely reach out and send us your feedback, your thoughts, your ideas, and if you want to have a discussion about A Course in Miracles, Barret and I are both available.
That'd be great.
So, mi amigo, I've got to get running here, but I will see you in 1 week.
All right, sounds good, man. Sounds good, man. Have a good one.
You too.
All right, bye.
Bye.